Hello and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering EDH deck tech idea. Today we are taking a look at Zoyowa Lava Tongue. It is a 2-mana 2/2 with Death Touch, and at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zoyowa Lava Tongue deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. This is a very cheap and unique Rakdos commander, but don't be fooled by his appearance because this can be a very powerful deck. Not only is this goblin a very cheap commander, it also has Death Touch, so your opponents will think twice about attacking you. And I have built this whole deck around annoying your opponents a lot by creating a bunch of sacrifice and discard triggers to put your opponents out of resources and then win the game. The most annoying phase for our opponents will be our end step, because we do play a lot of Endstep Punishment. First of all, we play our commander who has a very powerful end step trigger, which is triggered if a permanent card entered your graveyard this turn, but we got a lot more other end step triggers in stock. So we play Mahadi, Emporium Master, a 3-mana 3/3, and at the beginning of your end step create a treasure token for each creature that died this turn. He can give you a huge mana advantage, as we will force our opponents to sacrifice a bunch of creatures. We also play Braids, Arisen Nightmare, a 3-mana 3/3, and at the beginning of your end step you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it, and for each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Braids is an absolute value machine, because for sacrificing just 1 permanent you will most likely at least draw 1 card to never run out of gas. You play Oseo's Stick Twister, a 2-mana 2/2 with lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, if there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent may sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Then Oseo's Stick Twister deals damage equal to its power to each opponent who didn't sacrifice a permanent or discard a card this way. Keep in mind that it is the Stickmaster who deals the damage, so he will also help you stabilize due to lifelink. We also play Perforating Artist, a 3-mana 3/2 with Death Touch, and at the beginning of your end step, if you attack this turn, each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent of their choice or discards a card. And last but not least, we play Rakdos, Patron of Chaos, a 6-mana 6/6 with Flying and Trample, and at the beginning of your end step, target opponent may sacrifice 2 non-land non-token permanents, and if they don't, you draw 2 cards. And now I will present a few of our top end creatures that will most likely win us the game or generate a bunch of value for us. We play Rottenmouth Viper, a 6-mana 6/6, and as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may sacrifice any number of non-land permanents, and this spell costs 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way. Whenever it enters or attacks, put a blight counter on it. Then for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. If this creature stays unanswered, it will definitely win you the game, as it is a growing torment of hailfire on a creature. We wanna bring out Dusk Mangler, a 7-mana 5/4, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, discard a card or pay 4 life. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature, discards a card and loses 4 life. One of the cheapest win cons in this deck is Mayhem Devil, a 3-mana 3/3, and whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. As we force all of our opponents to sacrifice their stuff, we will get a bunch of sacrifice triggers, so this 1 damage will definitely add up. We play Vile Mutilator, a 7-mana 6/5, and as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature or enchantment. It has Flying and Trample, and when it enters, each opponent sacrifices a non-token enchantment, then sacrifices a non-token creature. We keep it going with those powerful demons. Arbiter of Woe, a 6-mana 5/4, and as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature. It has Flying, and when this creature enters, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life, and you draw a card and gain 2 life. At last we play Hollow Marauder, a 7-mana 4/2, and this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. It has Flying, and when it enters the battlefield, any number of target opponents each discard a card. For each of those opponents who didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, draw a card. For most of those demons we'll be needing additional sacrifice fodder, so let's play a few creatures that have powerful death triggers and will also be seen as a permanent card for Zoyowa. We play Shambling Guest, a 1-mana 1/1, and when it dies, choose 1. Target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or you create a treasure token. We play Vindictive Lich, a 4-mana 4/1, and when it dies, choose 1 or more. Each mode must target a different player. Target opponent sacrifices a creature, target opponent discards 2 cards, and target opponent loses 5 life. To make sure that we always got some fodder for our creatures, we play Squee Goblin Nabob, a 3 mana 1/1, and at the beginning of your upkeep you may return Squee from your graveyard to your hand. We play Clockwork Percussionist, a 1 mana 1/1 with haste, and when it dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it until the end of your next turn, which works really great as a 1-drop, and later on as sacrifice fodder that also brings along some impulse. We play Greedy Freebooter, a 1 mana 1/1, when it dies, scry 1 and create a treasure token. Last but not least, we also work with creatures that sacrifice themselves. And in this deck, Croxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, works really well. A 2 mana 6/6, and when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. When it enters or attacks, each opponent discards a card, then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. You can escape this powerful Elder Giant by paying 4 mana and exiling 5 other cards from your graveyard. If your opponents want to interrupt your powerful engine, you can just sacrifice your creatures into a few spells to draw even more value from those creatures. So we play Village Rites, a 1 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature and draw 2 cards. We play Nasty End, that you should reserve for your legendary creatures because it is a 2 mana instant. And as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. If the sacrificed creature was legendary, draw 3 cards instead. We play Eviscerator's Insight, a 2 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, so you draw 2 cards and you can also flash it back from your graveyard for 5 mana. We play Deadly Dispute, a 2 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. We play Corrupted Conviction, a 1 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, and you will draw 2 cards. Last but not least, Fanatical Offering, a 2 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, draw 2 cards and create a map token. As we are limited to our creature count, we also play a certain recursion package to sacrifice our creatures over and over again and get powerful ETB triggers or death triggers. So we play Coiling Rebirth, a 5 mana sorcery, and you can gift a card to an opponent as the spell resolves. So return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then, if the gift was promised and that creature isn't legendary, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's a 1/1. Of course, we play Reanimate, a 1 mana sorcery, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and you lose life equal to its mana value. Extremely powerful in this deck is Chainer Nightmare Adept, a 4 mana 3/2, and you can discard a card and you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn, activate only once each turn. This will allow you to throw a permanent card into your graveyard, which will immediately make you descend this turn, so you just secured your Zoyowa trigger. In addition to that, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until end of turn. We also play Victimize, a 3 mana sorcery, choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. To be a little bit more flexible, we play Rescue from the Underworld, a 5 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast Rescue from the Underworld, sacrifice a creature. Choose target creature card in your graveyard, return that card and the sacrificed card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of your next upkeep, but for that you exile Rescue from the Underworld. To recur our creatures over and over again, we also play Drana, the Last Bloodchief, a 5 mana 4/4 with flying. And when it attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard and you return that card to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and the creature is a vampire in addition to its other types. You want to win more? You get it. You play Siphon Mind, a 4 mana sorcery. Each other player discards a card and you draw a card for each card discarded this way. This is a very powerful spell as you make all of your opponents discard a card and you will also draw a bunch of cards back, which in the end fits really well into a deck that wants to make your opponents run out of resources as fast as possible. A card that really hits the theme in this deck is Stinging Cave Crawler, a 3 mana 1/3 with Death Touch, and whenever Stinging Cave Crawler attacks, if there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. What I like about this 3-drop is that it has Death Touch, which will make it for your opponents even more more unattractive to attack you, and if needed you can still swing with this creature to draw a card. Surprising your opponents out of nowhere is always a great thing during a game of Commander, so you play Flare of Malice, a 4 mana instant, and you may sacrifice a non-token black creature rather than pay the spell's mana cost. And if the spell resolves, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. Due to us making our opponents sacrifice their cards and also discarding their cards, we also play Bloodchief Ascension, a 1 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life, and if you do, you gain 2 life. Bloodchief Ascension alone can win games, so your opponents will definitely try to interact with this card. We sacrifice our creatures for even more value, but we also would like to have some blockers, so we play Mikaeus the Unhallowed, a 6 mana 5/5 with Intimidate, and whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. Furthermore, other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. That means if they die and if they had no +1/+1 counters on them, they return to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. And probably one of my favorite cards in this deck is Pain Magnification, a 3 mana enchantment, and whenever an opponent is dealt 3 or more damage by a single source, that player discards a card. This basically forces your opponents to discard cards or sacrifice a permanent, because if they don't, Zoyowa will deal 3 damage to them, and then they will end up with having to discard anyways due to Pain Magnification, so basically they can only lose. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I will play in Zoyowa Lava Tongue. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck. Make sure to check out my deck list in the notes below. Let me know which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I would say, see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.